Welcome to the Health and Wealth Power Hour, the podcast that provides you with the knowledge and insights you need to achieve physical, mental, and financial well-being. I'm your host, Arlen Pickett, a business consultant who's passionate about helping people achieve a more balanced and healthier life. Each week, we'll deep dive into topics related to health and wealth, including retirement income planning, innovative healthcare solutions, alternative funded health plans, and specific actions individuals and business owners can take to gain control of their finances, have access to affordable quality health care, and achieve peace of mind. We'll also be joined by innovative experts who will share their knowledge and insights on prevalent topics. So, whether you're looking to grow your wealth or improve your health, you've come to the right place. Get ready to be informed, inspired, and empowered. Let's get started. Well now, what time of day is it? Well, does it really matter? It's still time for the Health and Wealth Power Hour. That's right, another episode coming up right now. Arlen Pickett, your host. Glad you're with us again today. What could we be talking about today? Do you have any idea, or you ever really considered what the real status, what the real reason, what the real purpose of the United States of America really was way back in the day, even before it was the United States of America, when it was just a colony? The very first people that came here were looking for one thing and one thing only: a second chance, a real second chance. They came because wherever they were, whatever had happened in their lives, it was not going to be what they wanted it to be, what they hoped for. Whether it was just hopes and dreams that they could not realize where they were going somewhere where all things were possible because they were looking for a second chance. That's what this country was founded on, and that's what many, many, many people in many walks of life and in many situations still look for today. Well, we are extremely blessed and honored to have John David Graham with us today. This man knows all about second chances, not just of getting them himself, but of helping others get that second chance. John David Graham, welcome aboard the Health and Wealth Power Hour, sir.
I'm very glad to be here, Harlan. Thank you.
Man, I'll tell you, whenever I saw your story and really even talked to you before we got started here, what resonated with me the most is your desire for that one thing: second chances. That's what everything that you're doing is all about, whether it is the home for helping people get reconnected with the world and giving themselves a second chance after incarceration, whether that is your own story, that is a fictional story, loosely fiction, right? Running as fast as you can, the book that you wrote, talking about a life that was lost, a life that was useless, but it wasn't, because with a second chance came all the possibilities that were there, all the possibilities that could be realized. So talk a little bit about some history that you had that kind of really made you believe in and gave you the desire to help others get that second chance.
There's a lot of talk in the news right now about immigrants coming in looking for a second chance. But my opinion, based on my life and the life of people around me, is that there are a lot of people who are citizens, but are still looking for a second chance within the country. We're internal immigrants, I call it. We feel like we're wandering in a foreign land. And for me, I grew up in the mill towns around Pittsburgh in the 50s and 60s. And this was the time when the unions were very strong and you could make a living in a factory and support your family. And so we were expected to work in the mill after high school. You work for 30 years, you spend your night at the bars, you come home, you pay your bills, and then you retire at 60, and then you die. But the trouble with that is that for those of us, when the mills closed, there was nothing.
Right.
And so people they were disoriented, lost, didn't know what to do. And I came out of that environment, not having any idea what to do with my life. And I spent the next 30 years going from job to job to job, not just trying different things, but not connecting. And I call them detours. But I can't say they were mistakes because you can learn from everything you do. But the part that was hard was I had a family. At one point, I was even homeless, and at least until I met my wife, and she threatened me that she would not marry me until I had a job. So I quickly found one. The trouble is that you, if you go from job to job to job with a family, you end up moving. And I moved from state to state I was in construction at the time, trying to make a living, and that creates a great deal of instability for your family. So here we were at 53 years old, when most people are looking at retirement. I was still looking for the starting line. And my wife and I said, at this stage in our life, let's try to help somebody else who is struggling worse than we are. And so we started in our own home. We were in Ohio then. Let's open our own home and help homeless people. And we brought in people who were literally living on the street. And one thing led to another. And the Department of Correction asked us if we'd take people who were coming out of prison and homeless, low risk offenders who simply needed a safe place so they can get a job and start their lives again. And we started doing that with our own house, and then we would buy something next door and remodel it. And before long, we were able to actually, it took about 5 years, but we're actually able to make a living, pay bills at helping others. And over the last 24 years, we've helped 2,400 men and women restart their lives after prison. And there are times I just shake my head and I say, "How did this happen?" And I'm just in awe. And I think what it comes down to is that I never have forgotten what it felt like for me to be in their shoes. And so we're not just offering shelter. I believe we're offering acceptance and respect, which I think is a universal need. We all want to be accepted and respected.
Well, there's no doubt about that. No doubt at all. Uh, so it was almost happenstance to a certain degree. I mean, you obviously brought some homeless folks in. You wanted to help them with their lives, but it kind of expanded into that whenever all of a sudden you were offered an opportunity by the Department of Corrections to help even more people, probably more than what you were actually ready for at that time, but you were able to then prepare a place for them, as it were, and then it expanded from there.
Yeah, absolutely. They're what I call leaps of faith, where there was a need. The Department of Corrections said we can house 4 people if you have a place for them. So because of my construction background, we cobbled together what little money we had, and we bought a house next door and fixed it up. And I did all of the sweat equity myself, and that allowed us to have 4 people, then 6, then 8, and the state would actually compensate us because it costs $109 a day to incarcerate somebody, and that's why it can cost literally billions of dollars to run prisons. So when we say lock them up, this is the end result. And in my lifetime, we've tripled the prison population, and the end result is not, I don't think it's worked. So what we're doing now is we're trying to take low risk offenders, get them into the community. As long as they have safe, affordable housing, then they can work, they can pay taxes, they can pay child support, they can buy goods in the community. So instead of costing taxpayers $109 a day, they're spending that money in the community. So they're tax payers instead of tax burdens. So that's how this whole thing, it benefits Republicans and Democrats.
Yeah. Obviously. So in this program, or is this does this housing then allow them to get in maybe some other kind of programs they need to help with addiction or to help with other things, or is that mentorship and that help part of the program that you offer as well?
The good news is that we'd have to design our own program. It was the Department of Correction research showed that housing is critical. So they needed a stable housing partner, and we became that. And then the counseling, the drug addiction issues, the mental health issues, job and family search, that becomes the partners that are already out there. They can't offer housing, but we can offer counseling. So and number one, it helps me to be a better community partner, and it helps them to have the housing they need. So everybody wins.
So all this sounds really good on paper and on a podcast, but it doesn't always sound real good to the community where it's happening at. It sounds good where it's happening other places, right? Whenever I'm listening to the podcast, I'm going, "Yay, John, way to go! You're doing a great job." Wait, what do you mean you're opening one next door to me? No, well, not in my neighborhood. Did you run into any of that? As you've expanded, have you run into issues where people don't want those people in their
But
neighborhood?
probably this exactly what you just described, but with more expletives. So
I was trying to be sweet.
yeah, yeah, not in my backyard. NIMBY, we
Yeah,
call it. What
yeah.
happened was we had our first resident. The chaplain had referred him to us. He was going to come to our house. This is back in, I believe it was 2002. And he was coming from Cleveland. And we are in a rural area, a white rural area in the Dayton, Ohio region. And he was coming from what is perceived to be a black community. So the community heard that a black man from prison was coming into our white community. And what is he going to do to us and to our children? And immediately, when the word got around what we were doing, there were letters to the editor. There were a 10-year-old girl saying, "Am I safe to go to school?" You know where they got that from their parents.
Right.
And then there were petitions passed, and then the city council got involved, and they started looking at ordinances they could pass, and then there were threats. At one point, I had to have police protection because it got so mean, and, it was, my board advised us that we never open our blinds at night for fear of drive-bys, and, uh, eventually, we had to sue the city. And that took all in all, it took about 7 years to clear up all the legal issues. But here's the best part, Harlan. I used to go in with data to these, council meetings and say, "Look at the statistics. If you'll see that we can save money, or you'll see that people are looking for a second chance and they can be good citizens." Nobody's what they said was, "I don't care."
Right. I don't care. Yeah.
I had an attorney tell me that. He said, "I don't care. I just don't want them here." So what we did was, when winter came, I got out my snowblower and I cleaned my sidewalks, and I kept on going with it. I cleaned everybody's sidewalks on the block, and every time it snowed, I did that. And I spent the rest of the year cleaning up our house and making sure it was the best in the neighborhood. And I became a one-man neighborhood watch, trying to make sure that we had a quiet block. And in time, one snowfall after another, eventually the people saw us less as a threat and more as a neighbor, and they began to wave at us with all their fingers. So I thought, "Well, there's a symbol. Yeah, I know we made it."
Yeah. Absolutely. They stopped telling you you were number one.
Yeah, they weren't just pointing directions anymore. Um, but yeah, it's a process, but it was tough. It was very, very tough because you feel like you're all alone, and the only thing you can lean on is your faith and your determination to do the right thing. And I'll be quite candid. That's why I'm so disappointed with the current state of politicians, where they seem to go left and right depending on whatever is the latest news item.
Yeah. Whichever way the wind blows, right?
That's right. I don't mind if you disagree with me, but don't flip flop. Have a position, defend your position, and we'll agree to disagree. But, I'm concerned that the leadership seems to be looking for, the people to lead them, and the people don't know what they just feel what they feel. They don't know what they know.
Yeah. So as this was going on, obviously it had a happy ending in the fact that it took a while, but you were accepted. How much impact did it have on the program itself and more importantly, the people? Because they had to feel it, right? The folks that were staying there, the folks that you were housing, that you were providing this second chance, they had to know that the community didn't want them there. How did that impact them? Or were you able to buffer some of that so that they didn't get quite the impact that they would have?
Reggie was our first resident, and he said that he could feel people looking at him because he couldn't hide. He was a black man in a white world. And eventually his daughter, when he got an apartment in town after he left our house, and his daughter came to live with him, and she was biracial. And when she went to local high school, she said, she came home crying one day and said, I'm not accepted by the black students. I'm not accepted by the white students. I'm not accepted by anyone. And I felt, you know, we say so much with our rejection.
Yeah.
Nobody probably said anything to her, but she felt it.
Right. Right. Well, you try to make friends and they shun you. And so you say, okay, well, I'll make friends with these folks instead. And then they shun you. What are you supposed to do? Right. It's tough enough. In her case, she was moving to a new school. I'm sure if she was coming to live with him, she was
That's
moving to a
right.
new school. And now she can't even make friends because she doesn't fit in.
Uh, Probably one thing that helped us the most was our contract with the state was opened up to include the local probation office. And so the local probation office pays directly for jail costs. So they would refer people to us instead of going to jail. They were in our house for free. So it didn't cost the county anything. So we calculated over the next several years that we saved about $1 million in tax money to the local treasury. So, this is where when meets the road, there's usually a dollar sign somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, with 2,400 folks that have been through housing and have had second chances through your system, you must have some extraordinary case studies, as it were, some extraordinary studies or some stories about someone who just, I mean, went way beyond what even was expected in their second chance.
Probably the most notable example was Jimmy. He was a 67-year-old man when he was referred to us. They found him in his truck in the middle of January. Temperature was well below freezing. He had run out of gas and his truck wasn't running, and he was near death. But he was schizophrenic and a veteran. So the VA hospital said, "Will you take him? Because he can't live on the street." And we said we can, but he has to be on his medication. So we required that he every 2 weeks get his medication from the VA, and he stayed with us for 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, and before long, he was with us 14 years.
Wow.
And when he was 81 years old, he finally died. And before he died, he said, "This was the only home I ever had." And he had been abused as a child, and, he spent his life if it hadn't been for the VA, that was the only stability he had up until that point. But he spent most of his life in and out of it was so difficult that the mental health office wouldn't let him in because he was so disruptive.
Hmm.
So, with us, he was stable, and he was, genuinely at peace.
Well, that's amazing because he wouldn't have been. He probably wouldn't have lived to 81 either, quite honestly. He would have something would have happened in that. It's probably a blessing that he made it to 67 with the situations that he had going on there as well.
Yeah, and he had a prison record, so that made him a double outcast too.
Yeah.
And my guess is, from what I'm gathering, he was probably innocent of the charges. But what happens many times, not always, but many times, somebody will take a plea because they're told that they're going to get 40 years. And but if you agree to this plea, you can do 5. So a guy will take a plea of 5 years, do the 5, and then say it's over and done. But the tail that comes with it, the stigma for one, let alone the supervision that comes with it. And he spent most of his life in it, off and on of supervision or jail because of that. And it's his mental health issue is all it was.
Yeah. Wow. So how about some other stories? I mean, obviously he wasn't the only one with 2,400. You've had some other folks that come through there that probably ended up in jobs that they never believed that they would have possibly had, and successes that they never dreamed of.
We had a fellow that came to us. He was 16 years old when he was incarcerated, and he spent 9 years in prison. And he came to us, and he had nowhere obviously to go because his home was actually in Washington D.C., but he had been in Ohio when he was arrested, and his grandmother said that you stay with those white folks because yeah, you're not coming here to me and be on the streets. So he stayed with us, and we were able to connect him with a mentor. And he was 26 years old when he came to us, and all he knew was prison. And particularly, his brothers had been in prison, and his whole world had been prison. But we connected him to a mentor, and that mentor hired him in a vineyard, and he's been there for, I give or take, the last 15 years. He's now a manager there, and he's married and has a son, and he ended up buying a house in the next block from us. So, and I see him on Facebook.
Oh, that's awesome. So he knows he's in the neighborhood and he doesn't mind.
No, yeah, he does. He doesn't mind that we're in the neighborhood with him either. So
That's great. That's great. Yeah, I was gonna ask you, you were outside of just folks that were coming from incarceration, and you kinda answered that when you said the VA. One of the things, I'm in San Antonio, and it was kinda funny, we talked before, and you just happen to be in San Antonio right now too. We didn't even know that when we set this up, that this would be working this way. But one of the things that we see in San Antonio, military city, USA, is a lot of veterans that end up in situations where they need the mentorship, where they need homes. Um, it's a difficult situation for many that that's sometimes, as you were talking about the gentleman earlier, the only family some of them ever knew was actually the military. And when that military service is over, they think it's gonna be a different life than what they actually get. And there's a lot of I've been told by so many veterans that you learn all these things in the military, and unless you're in some kind of special thing, there's nothing that translates into real life.
right.
And so they find themselves many times homeless. They find themselves unhireable other than jobs that they feel like, why would I do that? So have y'all had the opportunity to help many veterans?
We don't ask if you're a veteran or not, but many times we'll find out that they are, because the only requirement we have is they're referred by their parole officer. They're homeless, and many times with VA housing, it's prohibitive for certain offenses. And to be quite candid, uh, many of the people we deal with have committed some sort of sex offense. And what I've learned, though, it immediately when you say that, people think the worst category. But
Sure.
I have often found that it's not the case at all. It's what we call Romeo and Juliet, where it was two young kids. One just happened to be 18, and one happened to be 15 and three quarters. And it was all with the approval of until they broke up. And unfortunately, when you're bombarded with sexual activity in the media, it happens in real life. And so they ended up being stigmatized. But the bottom line is, I really don't care what you've done. All I care is, are you willing to change and turn around? So if somebody comes to me, the only thing I look at is, are you homeless? I don't care what you've done if you're willing to comply with our basic structure and our rules. And so with the good thing with being a veteran is you have access to resources.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that is absolutely critical, particularly, when you have mental health issues like Jimmy did.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And we're finding that, probably 80% of all our residents have either addiction for drugs or, mental health issues. Alcohol or drugs and mental health, almost always.
Yeah. That's not surprising at all.
No,
at all. Quite honestly, it's not surprising at all. Well, let's step back to before then. You kinda started this new career, as it were, new pathway, you said when you're around 53, right?
right, right.
Okay. But earlier, much earlier, well back before then, in the '60s, the world was a little bit different place, and your place in it was a little bit different, and there was a lot of turmoil that is very similar in many ways to some of the things that are going on in society today. So can you talk a little bit about how what you remember about that time and how that experience helped mold you into who you became later in life?
I remember in elementary school that we had practice drills of getting under your desk.
Yep.
In case of a nuclear attack, you'll be safe because those desks were so sturdy that no nuclear bomb will affect you. Yeah, it's amazing the innocence you have in 4th grade. But I remember the day that President Kennedy was shot. I was in my biology class in the afternoon, and we just didn't know what to do because the world as we knew it suddenly stopped. And whether you're a Democrat or Republican, it didn't matter. None of us cared about that. We just cared that what happened to us. Our country is, we had never seen that in our lifetime or our parents' lifetime. And then you add every time the news would portray the conflict in live action in Vietnam, and you had protests, and then you had civil rights protests. And so every time you looked around, you were seeing violence and you were seeing instability and protest. And the government had become, in the eyes of many in the community, the cause of all this. But in college, because I left town as soon as I got out of high school, I went to college and I was in a rural school in Kentucky. And I happened to be up in Ohio on May 4th, 1970. And I heard there was a protest. So I went to it. And that turned out to be the very day of the Kent State shootings.
Okay.
And the National Guard surrounded us. And I was just there with a little Kodak. I'd had no idea. I was looking to pick up girls. And and the National Guard surrounded us. They had guns on us. Protesters were agitating and trying to provoke something. And what we all knew that this had gone violent just 2 hours prior. We knew it. And I thought that the world was about to come to an end. And when I got back to campus, I had been planning to join the Air Force. I had been accepted in navigator school. And I was just waiting to graduate. But after that incident, when I saw how unraveled our country had become, I couldn't do it. I just couldn't. I just never completed the process. And I spent the next 30 years not even going near a voting booth. I was so disillusioned by that. And I think that's part of the issue. When you grow up in that instability, you grow up in that chaos, you don't simply turn around and become a model citizen. Particularly in our culture where there was so much, Watergate was a capstone for us because everywhere we turned, we had such confusion. That's the best way to describe it. And it wasn't until I was 53 and determined that I needed I don't want to call it spiritual, but it really was. It was to turn around and say, okay, I messed up here. Maybe I can help somebody before they mess up over there. And so it was in doing something proactive, paying it forward, I suppose, trying to do something different that I was able to find my stability that I've been looking for all along. And I think the end product, what I learned was that life is extremely gray. The blacks and the whites are not as clear as we like it to be. And truth is so stretched on any given day that it's just very hard sometimes. And that's why I like to say that what we're going through today is very similar to what I went through in the 60s. So I have great sympathy for my grandchildren. And I'm hoping, and I'm doing my best to help them get through it better than I got through it.
Yeah, it is. There's a lot of there's a lot coming at you in this world right now from every different direction, even more so than the 60s because of the technology that's out there now. It's
Absolutely,
coming at from
absolutely.
every single direction nowadays. And that I agree. I wish these I'm holding up my cell phone, folks. I wish these we didn't have these. Wish we didn't have that tied to I honestly believe growing up in the '70s and '80s like I did, that I was a much happier child without that dadgum thing in my life that I didn't have that. I think I was a happier person and a more stable person because I didn't have that in my life.
No, I think that's true, and it's like, Henry Ford created Greenfield Village as a memorial to the life that his automobile destroyed. He created a rural community as a museum because it was no longer there. The automobile changed the world, and Henry Ford, was the key part of that, and so that's what the cell phone has done. For better or for worse, it's changed us, and so, how do we best work with it? And right now, I'm doing it with you. I'm trying to work with the technology.
Yeah, yeah, and that's right. You adapt, and uh, just because I feel like I would have been happier, my kids will never know that. So that's irrelevant, right? That's a moot point. That's I wish they would have had that opportunity, but they didn't. So I've got to just make sure that they're happy and stable as best I can in the world that we have today.
Yeah, at the risk we sound like we talk like this, we sound like we're getting old, but the truth is what, Dr. King was asked a very similar question to this. If he could go back in history, where would he choose to be? And so he listed certain memorial events, like if he were with the apostles, what he could learn from that, or if he were with Marcus Aurelius, could he learn from the great philosopher, or could he be with the church fathers, or would he be with Abraham Lincoln? And he said, when all things are considered, where I really want to be is right here in Birmingham in 1962, and because this is where I've been asked to be.
Yeah,
And this is where uh, I have to leave my mark for good or bad, and this is where God has called me to be. And I think that gives you a certain degree of peace.
it does. And I've you get the questions. I'm a guest on podcast as well, and I'm very much an advocate for changing our healthcare system. And I won't go into that, folks. You know where to find me if you want to look at it. There's plenty of stuff out there about me talking about those crazy things. But people ask me, well, don't you wish you would have started that pathway 20 years ago when you got in this industry? Don't you wish you would have known all that now? I said, well, not really. I had to go through the things that I did. I had to see things through, at that time, unjaded eyes, believing I was doing the right thing. And then all of a sudden realizing I wasn't helping people the way I thought I was. If I wouldn't have seen that, I wouldn't be who I am now. And I wouldn't have the mission and I wouldn't have the passion for bringing people access to healthcare, which is what we do. That's our only focus. And I wouldn't have that if I wouldn't have been through all those things.
I think that's at the heart of it. I think that's the key right there, is if you didn't have this, you would be back in 1975, and you would be forever that way, and
Yeah.
nothing would change, and your world would never grow, because growth by its very definition means change.
Yep.
And change produces stress, and, so if I had 8 different careers seemingly in all different directions, each one of them contributed to who I am and how I work with my people today. And it came out in the novel, and for the people who have read it, they could identify with that story because there's much of them in Daniel's journey.
Yeah, so let's shift gears to that. We've talked about the home that you did, and that's the next logical place for us to go is Running as Fast as I Can, the novel that you put out there that you were rejected by multiple different publishers before you finally found someone to accept it. And then you just turned around and won a whole bunch of awards and said, ha ha ha.
And that's exactly what I did. Uh,
And you waved at them and told them they were number one.
yeah, yeah, I really wanted to go to New York and say, "Eat this, boys." But, what I learned was that there are some very good books out there, that don't get published because they're not known, and publishing is a business.
Yep.
And most books sell no more than 250 copies in their lifetime. Uh, in fact, with Simon and Schuster, I believe the medium number was 12. They sell less than 12 or more than, it's just incredible numbers. And in other words, why should they invest in a know-nothing like me from a know-nothing place in Ohio with a story that could cost them a fortune to print, and they can't guarantee it'll sell? So I was getting 200 rejections, one after another, from agents and publishers. And the problem was I started to believe that it was not a good story.
Yeah.
And so I stepped back. I just stepped back, and I said, I need to find an outsider publisher who can publish an outsider's story. And that's when I founded Don Quixote Press. In other words, if all the doors are blocked, then you find a back door. And Don Quixote Press is intended for outsiders that nobody else will accept. And since we published this book a year ago, it's sold more than 6,000 copies. So we're already, according to New York standards, more than successful.
You're more than 12.
Yes, more than 12. But but with we garnered 26 awards for it.
Wow.
And that to me it made me realize that it is a good story. But what really made the difference was the reader reviews. People would write in Amazon or on Goodreads and say, I stayed up all night reading this story, or I felt Daniel, I cried with Daniel. I had a 91-year-old man say he stayed up till 3 in the morning because he couldn't stop reading. That to me is exactly why I wrote the story.
Yeah.
I call it everyone's story because on some level, we've all had a Forrest Gump life where we go from rejection and obscurity to making a difference in the lives of many people. Or Jimmy Stewart in Wonderful Life. You never know who you touched with your lifetime. And that's why, if anything, what I would say to people is if you have a dream and you've been rejected, so what? Just keep trying. Do it again. It will eventually work, maybe for your grandkids, but it will work.
Just like in Finding Nemo, right? Dory, just keep swimming. Just keep
Yeah.
swimming.
Yeah, it's interesting you should say that because I came up with a motto. In the book, that one of the key phrases we keep using over and over again is that life is a marathon. You just have to keep running.
Yep.
And because the world is written in pencil, not ink. And so you're going to fall down, you're going to make mistakes, but you can't erase those mistakes as long as you keep running. And that's what I tell people. Just don't quit. Don't quit.
So on a more personal note, going through the life that you had before you found a little more strange stability. I'm going to say at 53, you found a strange stability by opening up places where you invited homeless people to come stay in your house. I'm sorry, that's just kind of a strange stability, right? But that is a stability that you found. But as you worked through that process of your life and then found that stability, you had to have your own backbone of resources and support. Who was that? Or whom all was that? How you there's no way you go through the ups and downs and the changes and the things just on your own. It's just almost impossible to do that. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you did it all on your own, but where was your support system? Who was your support system?
I'll be candid. My wife, well, I was literally homeless when I met my wife, and I was living in a truck, and they repoed the truck, and she still married me, even though all her friends and even her pastor said, "Don't do it." And we've been together 47 years, and we've been through food stamps. We've been through near homelessness. We've moved through 3 states. We've been broke more than enough times to count. And she stayed with me because she has been my best friend. And no matter where I went or what I did, she was there with me. And so imagine if I were to say to any other woman, we're going to bring in a stranger who just got out of prison. And oh, by the way, he's black and he's coming to a white town. and we're going to bring him into our house, and he'll be just down the hall from our bedroom, and we're going to help him. And you can imagine that. And she did it.
I'm just trying to imagine that conversation, John. I'm telling you, I'm having a difficult time.
Well, it gets worse because the house we were living in was the cheapest house in town, and it was 140 years old, and it needed major remodeling that I promised her I'd do in 3 months. And 14 years later, we're still doing it. So, and she lived in that. One Christmas, I gave her a table saw. Oh, yeah, now that takes commitment. But through it all, and when we formed our nonprofit, obviously, I had to recognize that, so she became my residential services director, meaning that she does all the nitty-gritty, and now I'm 76, and she's a few years older than me, and she sh of all people, should be retired, but on any given day, even when I'm traveling, she'll call me and say, I'm going into one of our houses, and I'll be doing some drywall work, or I'm gonna be patching this pipe, or, I'm gonna be painting." I caught her on a ladder painting a porch ceiling and wearing a full hazmat suit to protect her from the paint. Now, that is commitment, so I could never, never have done this without her help because she is my best friend.
That is truly an amazing, uh, support system, quite honestly. That I mean, that's it. That really just wraps it all up and puts the bow on it right there because, yeah, without her, first of all, accepting what your dream was, and then it becoming her dream too, it dies on the vine, right?
Well, let me give you the capstone on that. We moved from our own house, singular, to, when we were offered the chance to, have a contract with the state, we had to have another building, and so the house next door, the apartment building went up for sale, and, I said to her, "If we buy that, we can use that and have 4 or 5, 6, 8 people there, and that can actually become, pay our bills." And, but I don't have the money, and she had just gotten a minor inheritance when her parents passed, and I said, "If you'll use that inheritance, then maybe we can use it for this house." And she said, well, she said something to me about no, but, but she did. She used the few $1,000s that she had, and we bought that building and fixed it up over the next 2 years, and that allowed us to start to where we are today with 19 houses in 3 different counties,
Wow.
and because of her, leap of faith. That's the best way to describe it.
Yeah. But it was definitely a leap of faith, but she she put her money where y'all's mouths were, right? I mean, let's put it that way. Y'all were saying, "This is what we believe in. This is what we're going to do." Uh, you didn't have a lot of money to do it. What very limited funds you had, you put it all towards doing that with that dream of the future. So that's remarkable.
Yeah, and I think that's what it comes down to. If you believe something, uh, when the pressure gets intense, uh, that's when you have to really double down and say, "Why am I here?" And you pull together and you say, "We're in this together. We leave no body left behind. We're not gonna turn on one another. We're going to stay with our calling. What's our reason for being here?" And it's not just it's to help people. It's we're trying to make a difference in our little corner of the world so that maybe at the end of my life, I can say I did my best.
So on your website, which is johndavidgraham.com, folks, John David Graham, you have a few different things going on. You obviously have your book on there, and then you have a trailer for the book, which I thought was very moving, by the way, folks. So you can also go see some of the podcasts. But there's a place down there where you wrote a story about Girl Scout cookies. Okay. So, and then there's more stories underneath that. I have to admit, I only got through the Girl Scout cookies. What's that all about? I got to know what the girl, because I was laughing so hard. John. I was after the Girl Scout cookies because, folks, let me just tell you, when you go on to the website, johndailygraham.com, and you're scrolling down, you see a stack of cookies and it says, I've met the devil. And it's about a Girl Scout cookie salesperson.
This is the first time I've been asked that question on these podcasts, and uh, I I was a journalist at one point, and I wrote a syndicated column, A Slice of Life, and I came up with these, farcical stories, and I have a sweet tooth, and, if I have a cookie, I will have the box. I call it that one sleeve at a time, but I eat the whole box, and, I came up with this idea of I met the devil, and, she's 4'10" and wearing a Girl Scout uniform,
Yes,
and so she seduced me into buying these Thin Mint cookies because they are thin,
they are
and
thin.
that's the vegetable. So, therefore, you'll lose weight. And I said, "Oh, I can. I'm on a diet." But the bottom line, Kathy will smell, chocolate on my breath. And she says, "Trust me. I,
Yeah.
I would never lie to you." So I said, "Put me down, little girl." So I have that's when I started to do my fun writing, I call it.
It is, folks. You got to go out there just to read the story because he really condensed it there. But it's hilarious. I was dying. I'm like, this is just awesome right here. I love this story because we've all been there. We want to help them out, right? We want to help them out, but the last thing I need is another daggum box of cookies.
I did a Facebook, a post, a year ago or so, and I told a story about sitting in my library, and I heard a voice calling, "John, John," and it came from my refrigerator, and it was a gallon of mint chip ice cream calling my name, and he kept calling me, till eventually I just had to have a bite, and before you know it, the gallon's gone. So, it's a universal story about temptation, shall we say.
Uh, I did. I thought it was very humorous, and so it shows another side of your writing as well, which I thought was very interesting because obviously I haven't had an opportunity to read the book yet, but I'm sure because any story that's serious, there's also moments of levity. So I'm sure that there are some humorous parts to it because that's just part of writing. I understand, but there's no doubt that this was just a little tongue in cheek there as well. So it shows your perchant for being able to be a little flippant too, and a little fun and a little laughing at ourselves, as it were, because that's exactly what you were kind of doing.
It was my therapy time, shall we say. Let me give you a good example, Harlan, in this. I in my book, I wrote a chapter about a Vietnam veteran coming back and wanting to commit suicide, and Daniel meets him and tries to help him through that while they're camping up in Glacier Park, in Montana. And then he leaves that situation, and he's out hitchhiking in 1970, hitchhiking towards San Francisco, the city of love, because he's heard it's a great place. And, there's this bus that comes that's painted in psychedelic colors, blue and red and magenta and yellow, and with flowers all over it, and he can hear it coming through the mountains, and when the bus stops in front of him, he said the window cranks open and smoke rolls out, and Daniel could tell, even in his 4 sheltered years at a Methodist college, that this smoke was lots and lots of marijuana. And he said, "Doug, he's saying to himself, do I get in the hippie bus or do I stay here and wait for some other trucker to try to kill me like they did last night?" He said, "I got in the bus." And then he tells the story of this culture shock of dealing with Sunshine and Mellow, 2 hippies who were taking him to San Francisco. I had a lot of fun with that chapter.
Uh, and that's the world we live in and the situations we deal with. And there's many serious things going on. As I mentioned, I'm in the healthcare and healthcare access world, and there's so many things that happen that are not light subjects, right? They're not they're heavy subjects, and there's a lot of angst to be associated with them. But there are times when you really have to take a breath and you got two choices in. You can laugh or you can cry. And one of those can make you feel better, or both of those can make you feel better. But I think either way you choose, I like the laughter because the laughter then seems to, for me personally, it seems to lift me up. It seems to lift me up and maybe open up a couple of closed brain waves and help me think better. Gives me a more positive attitude that this too we can overcome. Um, I'm not against crying. I think for some people it may work the same way because I've seen people crying and then just get frustrated and then get mad and then just get to ornery where they're like, I'm fixing it now because I'm not going to be upset about this anymore. So I think it can work both ways, but you got to know
Yeah.
yourself.
One of the models I look at, I didn't plan it this way, but it turned out that Forrest Gump, the movie, is which I thought was far superior to the book, because in the book, Forrest was he was a hostile figure and not abusive, but he was just mean spirited. But Tom Hanks did such a wonderful portrayal of Forrest, going from this being this outcast to being this almost a godlike figure who carried he became almost the Messiah. He carried our pains, and he pulled people to him and healed them. And I thought, in our pain, in our suffering, we can help other people like Forrest did. And you laughed so many times through that movie, but in the end, it was actually a very sad story, even though it was uplifting.
Yeah.
Because in the end, you see that feather floating up into the sky. You knew that that was his love for Jenny, and, you knew his heart was with her, but he was devoted to helping his son, because his son now was his salvation. And I think Daniel's story is that way. There's some a really tough period of grief that we deal with there, but that's the making of the story, because we all deal with grief. It's how we deal with it.
How we deal with it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And let's be honest, there's no right way for everyone. Everyone has to deal with it in their own way, but there are positive ways to deal with it and there are negative ways to deal with it. And I think that's what we have to decide for ourselves as well. And I think that's where so many people get lost too and and they fall into a rut, they fall into a hole, they fall into a bottomless pit sometimes. There's no doubt that I'm sure you have talked to many people that end up having housing with you that they talked about a certain incident in their home in their life that caused just a free fall into whatever happened to them.
Informally, what we've found with virtually every resident we deal with, they come from some degree of broken home. Because think about it, not only did they go to prison, so they're coming with the stigma of having been an outcast for going to prison, but when they come out, they have nobody to support them. So they're double homeless.
Yeah.
They're an ex-offender, and they're coming out with no place and nowhere to go. So yeah, I can't imagine. It's like that little bit I felt being homeless on 1,000 times over. And then you couple in mental health issues, it gets even worse. So
Yeah.
it's, I think that there's a reason why the Bible talks about helping the least of these, and much of the story in the gospel is about Jesus going to people who were outcasts,
Right.
and he avoided the people who were powerful and who were popular and who could save him, and he purposely chose the people who had nothing to give him.
Yeah, the powerful people he hung out with, I guess you can say, were the ones that know the tax collectors and the ones that right? I mean, you think about the ones that, the mean people, I guess is what you would say, the ones that even the good guys didn't wanna be with the tax collectors and the people that were they didn't like that at all. But yeah, he kinda shunned the priest and the religious leaders. He didn't he didn't hang out with them.
I write a newsletter on Substack where I can wrestle with these thoughts. And a couple weeks ago, I wrote a story about something Dr. King said years ago about what he called the drum major instinct. We all want to be in power. We all want to be at the right hand and the left hand of the throne. And the disciples were that way, James and John. And instead, and he didn't know it at the time, but today the church, in many ways, has sidled up to power. We've wanted to have the right politicians. We wanted to have the right people in the right positions so that we could have our own direction in government and we could tell the community what they should do and what they should believe. We want to be in charge, the drum major. And I think that's the reason why the church attendance is down 20%. And the majority of this Generation Z, 30%, are saying, I have no affiliation, no faith whatsoever, because they see nothing in the church to attract them. And that says volumes of where we've tried to choose by the live by the political sword, and historically we'll die by the political sword. It's not what we do well.
I I agree. I agree. There's little doubt that the church that I grew up in does not exist today. In my opinion, it just the church I grew up in with the morals that were taught, the way we were meant to follow Jesus, the way there. I grew up with the Bible is the Word of God. Period. That's it. And we didn't have very many feel good sermons. There was a lot of fire and brimstone. And unfortunately, I think a lot of church today is feel good.
Yeah, because if you don't feel good, you're not going to come back, and if you don't come back, then we can't pay your salary, and it's we all want the pastor to be prophetic, but the truth is that we don't want him to speak prophetically about me, but only about you. Now, I'm going to be careful. I think the church has the potential, particularly in this age of great instability. If you look at pictures from 1970 or 1960, you see politicians who were very powerful, and we hardly recognize them because we don't know who they are or what they did because it's all fleeting. But I like to compare it this way: that Jesus was killed on the cross of Caesar, and today we name our children after Jesus followers, and we name our dogs after Caesars who were in power at that time. So where is real power? It's never in politics. It's in service. And that's what the church, I think, can do best. And when it does, the church can be a light on a hilltop. Call me an optimist, but
Yeah. 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 I mean, I think the potential is there as well. I just believe that, and I'm sure there are some churches that are doing things the right way. I'm sure that there are. It's a widespread thing across the country that attendance is down, but there are some churches whose attendance is up. I think that a lot has to do with where you are, what you're doing in the community, how you're serving your community, because that's what the church is all about: is serving the community and bringing people together to worship the Lord. So we won't get any further down into the
Well,
religious
I will
road,
say
but
this, Harlan, that there are 2 churches in our Dayton area. We have most of our houses in, what I call the ghetto. It's an area that lived past its prime, and we have 2 churches that do what I consider they do the acts of their faith. One offers a free dinner every Thursday night, and our residents will often go over there, and the other one has a free pantry, and our residents always go there on Friday. No questions asked. What do you need? We will give it to you. And that to me, they are shouting the gospel without saying a word.
yeah, no, I think that's extremely important. What you just said, those are the services that really make an impact in people's lives because hunger is a real deal. And you can think a lot straighter and work a whole lot harder and do a whole lot better when you're not hungry.
I had a pastor come to me one time and say, when we first started, "Do you ask people if they're saved when they come to our house?" And I said, "No, I ask them if they're hungry." And that's the only question they can hear right now. And he said, "Well, I can't support you then." So, unfortunately, that's not uncommon.
It's not, and it shouldn't be that way, right? I mean, if we show them the works, then I don't I'm once
Well,
again.
actually, think about it this way. Right now, in this period of great angst and instability, and there's a great deal of fear. If we, it's like being at the Alamo. We can draw a line in the sand and say, "Here's fear and here's courage," and all those who want to step forward, and everybody else steps back because they're so afraid. So I'm just standing here, and suddenly I'm at the front of the line, and I didn't move because everybody else is so afraid. So what we're doing now is we're not doing great things. We're just doing normal things because nobody else seems to do them.
Yeah.
And that's where the church, I think, can really shine, doing what government doesn't have the stones to do because it's unpopular.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. That sums it up pretty well. Alright, I'm gonna ask you one more question, and I'm gonna let you go. You started over and started what even, probably 10 years before that, it wasn't even a thought. Maybe even 5 years before that wasn't even a thought of what it would be for your dream. What if you would have known then what you're doing at 76, you'd have laughed and said, "You've lost your mind. There's no way that's what I would be doing." But you started over at 53. So what would you tell someone that's thinking of starting over or has no choice but to start over? What would you say to them? What would you advise them to do to make that a reality?
To be fair, both of my kids have had jobs in houses where they've been for 20, 25 years, so they're very stable, and they contemplate what are they gonna do next, and that's very frightening to them because they've never had to make changes. So I would say that, when it comes if you're faced with a sudden cataclysmic change, like the factory closed down, I would absolutely find ways to retool, find a new skill, and connect with people. And that's what I did. I spent months and years connecting with people who were doing something that I could learn from. And I made many trips to the state capitol to attend anything I could to learn how to better serve in our shelter housing. And for no pay, it was all out of my pocket, but I did it because I didn't have a choice. So I would say the worst thing you can do is do nothing. Just keep moving, and you will absolutely make mistakes, and you pull in support from somebody wiser or somebody who's been there before you, and you get help, but never stop running. It's your life is not a sprint. It's not a dash and then you stop. It's a marathon where you pace yourself and you run until you're done with the race. And you never know when that is. You just keep moving.
And that's very powerful, very powerful. Thank you so much, John, for being on the Health and Well Power Hour. I really do appreciate all the insights you gave. You have an amazing, remarkable story, and I wish you all the best in the future, continuing on your pathway, buddy.
And it was fun talking about those Girl Scout cookies.
Yeah, keep updating that if you write any more of those, so I can get me some more good laughs there, brother.
Yeah, well, I still get my therapy out of that. Thank you so much, Marlon.
All right. Hey, folks, hope you enjoyed today's podcast. Don't forget, you can go check out John David Graham at johndavidgraham.com. How ironic, right? You also can check out more of the story of the Good Samaritan home at, are you ready? GoodSamaritanHome.org. Man, I'll tell you, you got the right websites for the places that you want to go. Once again, appreciate everyone being here. Catch you next time on the Health and Well Power Hour. We are out of here.